And that's just something that the Spurs have been, not only reluctant, but just have denied to do, essentially. Alright, everybody, welcome back to another episode of NBA Now. I'm your boy Dom, and we're going to get right into things here today. So, today, we're going to be talking about the San Antonio Spurs. And we're going to kind of be looking at how they got to where they are now, what they can kind of do to get back to where they were. But, to really start things off, we have to look at the history of the Spurs, right? We know the Spurs were a dynasty, winning multiple championships throughout Tim Duncan's tenure there. Won in 1999, won in 2003, won in 2005, won in 2006, and finally won in 2014 versus the Heatles, right? And so to look back at the history, it all starts with David Robinson, right? You get David Robinson, your first overall pick in 1987. He's the first pick in the draft in the first round, and that is your franchise player for years to come. Now, he ends up getting injured in the 1996 season, and that allows you to get the first overall pick in the 1997 NBA draft, and you draft Tim Duncan, a player that would go down as a top 10 player all time and would pretty much change your franchise's history from, not much of a winning culture to one of the most winning cultures of a team in NBA history, and, pretty much the gold standard for NBA teams until about 2017. They were considered the gold standard of an NBA team pretty much from the moment that they drafted Tim Duncan, right? Following that, like I said, 2 years later, you win the championship in 1999, and then you continue to retool after, guys like David Robinson get old and stuff like that, and in the 1999 draft, in the second round with pick 57, in the draft, you go out and you get Manu Ginobili, and he becomes a big piece of what you do. And then a couple years later, in the 2001 draft, your first round pick, pick 28, you grab Tony Parker. And we obviously know that somewhat was a big three, right? Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, and Manu Ginobili. Now, the success doesn't happen for the Spurs without those three and without Gregg Popovich, right? Those are the four pieces of success that led to them being such a good team and, being so good for so long. At this point, all of those players are retired, and Gregg Popovich is nearing retirement as the head coach. So you've nearly lost every piece that made you the dynasty that you were, and you've had to retool and try and rebuild. And one of those things that allowed you to kind of retool and rebuild, prior to where you're at now, was Kawhi Leonard, right? You bring in Kawhi Leonard, and he ends up winning Finals MVP in 2014 when you win that final championship with Tim Duncan. Obviously plays a pivotal role in that. And, this is a guy that still to this point, obviously we know that he's been on a couple teams since then. He's won another championship since then. But he, just this last season averaged 25, 6, and 5. And, he's going to be injured this next season, but he's only 29 years old, right? So you traded for him because I believe he was drafted by the Indiana Pacers, and you were able to go out and get him and bring in a guy that really became your franchise player once Tim Duncan left. And you were winning against the Warriors until obviously Zaza Pachulia injured him. Now, when we look at the turning point for the San Antonio Spurs, it's either one of two things. It's either that injury, where you could have gone to the finals, obviously being up in game one of the Western Conference Finals, or soaring back in game one of the Western Conference Finals, however you want to put it. But regardless, that could be looked at as a turning point, or what transpired from that in the trade of Kawhi Leonard could be looked at as a turning point. Now, I'm completely with Kawhi on this point of it's his body. He knows it better than anybody at the medical staff, and if he still felt something was wrong, something was wrong. Now, I think he sits a lot of games personally, and I think that's a little bit soft, but, it's his body, and he obviously knows it better than anybody else. So, I'm completely with him on that. But, the problem was with this trade was Gregg Popovich. He didn't want to trade Kawhi to a team that was, somewhat close. like, he didn't want to trade to the same conference. He didn't want to trade him where he wanted to go, to like the Lakers or a warm weather situation. So he banished him to Canada, where Kawhi ended up winning a championship. But this, in return, diminished the returns that the Spurs were able to get. Instead of getting, Brandon Ingram, who's turned into an all-star for the New Orleans Pelicans, or a Jaylen Brown, who's turned into an all-star level player for the Boston Celtics, as a young player, right, those guys are still getting better to this day. Obviously, Brandon Ingram was eventually traded from the Lakers, but you weren't able to get either of those guys from big market teams, where Kawhi, I think, would have been rather gone, right? Instead, you got DeMar DeRozan, who was your franchise player that led you to pretty much no winning, other than low seeds and losing to my Denver Nuggets in the playoffs, and then not even making the playoffs this last season, or not even making the play-in, for the matter of fact. But, you're able to get DeMar DeRozan, your still current starting center in Jakob Poeltl, because in the draft recent years, you've just targeted guards. And so it's really been the recent years that you've kind of looked at as the turning point for this organization. But, and then you also got one first-round pick who, I don't even know who that first-round pick turned into off the top of my head. But it was somebody. And so, that's pretty much where we're at now, right? You did all that, and then in the drafts following up with that, you went out and you got players. You had a young guard in DeJounte Murray, who you believed to be very good. Sadly, he got injured. He still came back. He's pretty good to this point, but I think his progression and potential was kind of, is and kind of will be limited from that injury that he got, as it was either Achilles or an ACL. It was some sort of leg injury that's pretty severe. So he got that. You were able to bring in Derek White and develop him, but you are slightly overpaying him at this point. Again, you didn't get much in the... you were able to get some picks out of the DeMar move, which works, but you probably should have traded him sooner than you did, as it wasn't leading to a ton of success. But you definitely improved his playmaking. You drafted a guy like Lonnie Walker and Devin Vassell, and even in this last draft, Josh Primo, and prior to that, Keldon Johnson, who's probably going to be the best player on your team this year, and even a Trey Jones. So, that's 6 of your, better draft picks are all guards. Luka Samanic has not panned out to be much, and, there's still time for him. And then you've taken flyers on, Zach Collins. You brought back Bryn Forbes and, another guard. And you took kind of a flyer on Doug McDermott, right? You gave him $13.7 million a year for 3 years. And so you're just in a really weird situation, roster-wise. You're in a really weird situation, coach-wise, because once Popovich retires, do you go, with one of the assistants? Do you go with Tim Duncan? How do you transfer from one of the greatest coaches of all time to a different coach? And to be honest, I think once he retires, it'll be better for this team. And the reason I say that is because Popovich is stubborn, right? He's stubborn in his trades. He's stubborn in... The Spurs do not trade, right? They develop. But when you constantly pick guards, you have to be able to fill out the roster with other types of players, or you're never, going to get better. And I think one thing that's kind of underrated, though, was Keldon Johnson, right? This is a guy that I want to say he's about 6'5". He plays a small forward position now, but coming out of college, he was like a point guard, shooting guard, point guard, however you want to classify him. But, in the Spurs system where he's smaller, he's definitely beefed up and stuff like that, but he's kind of forced to play that small forward position just because of how many guards you have on the roster, and he's really developed. Now, I think he has a potential to become a most improved player this upcoming season, kind of taking DeMar's role as that main guy. Obviously, he played on the Olympics, and, this last season he averaged about 12.8 points per game, half a steal, so a steal every other game, block every couple games, and then 2 assists and 6 rebounds. So, I think he's got a good chance to jump up as a player. I think we all think that he's a little bit better than his stats show him to be. And so, that's really what you're looking at as a franchise player right now, paired with DeJounte Murray. Those are your 2 best players. And neither of them average 20 points per game. So it'll be interesting to see what the Spurs do this season. But really, if you look at why they're bad, it's pretty much the Toronto Raptors stole their star, right? I think we can all look back at that trade as a clear and obvious underpay for Kawhi Leonard, even though Kawhi only stayed there for a season, right? But he did get them a ring. And then even if you're really, it's Gregg Popovich. Gregg Popovich is the reason that the Spurs are no longer good, because although he's a good coach, he was slow in adapting to the modern NBA. He's stubborn with his trades, and being stubborn with your assets lowers your assets, right? You want to be able to have as many assets as possible. A guy like Sam Presti maybe overdoes that, where he constantly flips players for more picks, brings them in, has them have a good season, and then flips them for more picks, right? That's a guy that loves assets, but you need to be somewhere in between that to be a good team in the modern NBA, where you can have good players and you can still have assets and movable contracts and stuff like that across your team, so that you can constantly get better and fit what you need for your team to be successful. And that's just something that the Spurs have been, not only reluctant, but just have denied to do, essentially, for a long period of time. And so, that's really what you're looking at as a Spurs fan. Now, I think Spurs fans, they're a young roster, so there's a lot of hope there. You guys will have some money in free agency. How much you guys will spend it, I don't know. You guys aren't much of a free agent destination, but I'm sure you'll probably re-sign a guy like Thad Young, or you'll spend money on some underrated veterans and stuff like that, but you just have no star player, really. Even if Keldon Johnson turns into a most improved player and averages over 20, I don't think he's good enough at all to be a number one option on a championship team. And so it's a difficult situation, because even if you wanted to be on the level of like an 04 Pistons team, where they didn't have necessarily like that number one star option, then you're looking at having to have like 4 or 5 of Keldon Johnson level players, right? And at most, maybe you have 2 with DeJounte Murray, but I don't think Derek White's going to get much better. Maybe Lonnie Walker gets better, but I think the idea of Lonnie Walker is a little bit better than Lonnie Walker himself. And then some of your other younger guys on the roster, just question marks on how they fit and stuff like that. So, as a Spurs fan, or I'm not a Spurs fan, but for Spurs fans, I would look at it as an upside. Once Gregg Popovich does retire, he got you 5 championships, and that was super good. And so, you just have to accept that you had one of the greatest coaches of all time. But as a GM, typically coaches are not the best, and I think Popovich proved that. Even though being one of the greatest coaches of all time, he proved that you need that line of succession. And I think Popovich controls their moves. If Popovich doesn't want a trade to happen, it's not going to happen. If he wants a trade to happen, it's going to happen. So he's pretty much their GM. Even if they have a GM, I consider Popovich their GM, and that does cause problems for organizations. I believe Van Gundy, when he was with the Pistons, had that same issue, and obviously we saw how that turned out for them. And then pretty much any time that a coach just is given that much power, it just doesn't work out great for the team. It's a good theory. They can build the mold of the team that they need exactly, but they typically just don't balance their assets as well and stuff like that. Like the GM not only has to build the team, but they have to do a lot more in just like counting what you have, you know what I mean, and making the smart decisions. Maybe not always the decision that the coach wants the most. So yeah, I think there's a lot of bright side with this Spurs roster, especially, this video was kind of inspired by the fact that Ginobili, just a couple days ago, or might have been yesterday, kind of announced that he's going to be going back, not to play for the Spurs, but kind of as like a player and mentor role, and that'll be super good for a lot of the guards that they have in this roster. Hopefully in the next couple of years, they kind of figure out what guards they're going to keep for the future, what guards they're going to, move on from, and stuff like that, and kind of just be able to work this roster to be able to just fill out some more of those positions and maybe have a little bit more size to it. Obviously small ball's become a big thing, but size does still matter, especially with some of the elite bigs in the NBA now, like Giannis, like Joel Embiid, like Jokic. There's just more talent down below than there was in like the 2000s and stuff, where it was really Tim Duncan, Dwight Howard, and you had Yao for a little bit, but he was pretty injury prone. So, the talent now down low, I think, is severely better, right? You have MVP candidates across multiple teams at, center and power forward positions that score interiorly. And so having Jakob Poeltl is really your only true center, other than like a Drew Eubanks, who's a small center at 6'9", as your only really real centers on the roster, just doesn't bode well against some teams like that. And I think this year will kind of be a weed out type of players. Okay, we're going to stick with these guys. Okay, we're not going to. And if Popovich does leave after this year, I could see the team being a little bit more aggressive with their assets, maybe moving on from some of these guards and sticking with some stuff. And I think Spurs fans would really appreciate that, because you would just see some movement and you would finally, hopefully, get back to being good again. I think when the Spurs are good, it's good for the NBA because they're a small market team that's smart. And I think we all kind of look at them as, they'll get back to that gold standard that they were, however long it takes for them. But I do see it happening eventually. And I think the future of Spurs basketball looks bright. Maybe the current setting of it isn't great, and they might be one of the least talented rosters in the NBA, yet they're still going to find a way to win games because, like I said, they've got Gregg Popovich, one of the best coaches of all time. So I know it kind of seemed like I was hating on the Spurs in this video, but I really wasn't. I'm just being very critical of the moves that they've done. Obviously they're in the last 20 years, they built themselves into a historic franchise in the league, with some of the most championships out of any team in the league. So yeah, that's pretty much going to be it for today's video. Appreciate everybody watching, appreciate the support. If you guys enjoyed, make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe for more. Helps out the channel, helps out the video, and helps us keep rolling in this this whole thing. So yeah, that's gonna be it. It's been your boy Dom. I'll catch y'all next time. Peace out, guys.